Hey guys, welcome back to the show. I got a guest for you tonight. Jim couldn't make it, but I have Annette Evans on as a guest tonight. She's going to be doing an interview with me. Annette is a competitive shooter with the USPSA. She's sponsored by King Shooter Supply, Better Bullets, Gray Guns, Filster, On Target Performance, Brilliant Backstraps, Springer Precision, and Noon Hydration. She's also an attorney, an author, a blogger, a self-defense shooting instructor, and she owns a range called Race Street Range in Philadelphia. In addition to all that, she's also super smart, super cool, super fun to talk with. I hope you enjoy my interview I did with her, and we hope to have her back again soon. Enjoy.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
So how are you?
I'm okay. It's been a long day.
I know that feeling. So I was trying to compile all of your big bullet point intro things, and I Google your name and I find stuff everywhere. But it seems like most of your competitive shooting stuff is USPCA, right?
USPSA.
And you have to forgive me because I'm not really into the competitive stuff yet. I'm trying to kind of introduce myself to it. I shoot at work, but the competition sports, I'm not sure of all the disciplines. So
And it's USPSA, United States Practical Shooting Association.
Bam. There we go. And so you are pretty competitive in your region, right? I imagine that's broken up geographically somehow.
Yeah, there's 8 areas in the United States.
All right. And you tend to usually either rank or win a lot of the matches that you're in, and obviously enough that you're sponsored by a whole bunch of people, which is cool.
Yeah, I don't know about winning stuff locally, but I do okay. I do well among the women in the area. I am still fighting against the guys. Probably, like a top third kind of shooter.
Well, that's still pretty good in any group of people, especially people that do it for fun. But I mean, clearly good enough to get sponsorships. You were shooting for SIG for a while, and not so much anymore, or
SIG dropped their entire team about a year and a half ago. So yeah, except for Max and Lena, none of us shoot for SIG anymore.
Well, life happens, I guess.
Yeah, it was a great opportunity.
So you first started shooting around 2006, and that was just kind of a hobby, right? Like a thing you and your husband did for fun.
Every girl should learn how to shoot.
Yeah.
that really was what it came out of. Is I thought that every girl should learn how to shoot. And Mark had shot in high school. He shot for his high school rifle team, as one does at a military academy. And he had gone to the range for some team building activity, whatever, for work. And I said, hey, you got to go to the range. You know how this gun thing works. I want to learn how to shoot a gun. And so we went to the range, and the blind led the blind, and we discovered it was kind of fun. And we'd go to the range, every weekend, every other weekend, and just play, basically, plink a little bit, maybe try to make a smaller group or something. Nothing really formal.
Cool. And so somewhere along the road, you decided it was time to start taking some lessons. If I gathered right from one of the bios that I read, right? You wanted to do some coaching or lessons of some kind.
Yeah, what happened was we were shooting at a public range, and it was kind of terrifying. And I thought that I had this idea that if I was an NRA instructor, that people would take it less negatively if I tapped them on the shoulders, like, hey, would you like a couple of hints? Now, those hints were generally aimed at, trying to keep extra holes out of my body.
Yeah.
But it was sort of a start, right? It was just like, hey, I'm an NRA instructor. Do you mind if I help you out a little bit? And kind of maybe, you'd see a lot of, the girls being brought to the range by their significant other or a brother or a father or something. And they were being given some really bad starts. I mean, I was lucky I didn't have that experience, but we were seeing it all the time. And I also wanted to be able to kind of go up to them and be like, hey, girl to girl, do you mind if I help you out a little bit? I'm an NRA instructor. And I thought that maybe that would be a safe way to do it instead of just being some random woman at the range kind of barging in. Be like, hey, I'm an instructor. Can I give you a little bit of your time, girl to girl?
Yeah.
And give people a better experience.
Well, and there's a couple things. I I know, at least in my community, a lot of the guys and frankly gals that I work with, if they try to teach their significant others something,
It goes badly.
doesn't really work all that great.
It goes badly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So can you tell me about what I know you kind of got into it, but when you decided to go to the NRA instructor thing, what were kind of the motivations behind that beyond just, I guess what I'm looking for is the coaching aspect of it. Were there certain things that you were trying to improve on beyond teaching others?
In that first couple of classes is just like, hey, think I should be able to do this kind of thing. After that, it was sort of just the progression here kind of went from every woman should know how to shoot a gun. And then, hey, if I'm going to shoot guns a lot, I think I want to own a gun, instead of renting it all the time. Well, if I have a gun in my house and something happens and I don't know how to use it, I'd feel kind of silly. Let me go find out how to, use it in my house for home defense. Or I'm out here in public and I have guns, but I don't know how to carry one. Like, what do I need to learn in order to be able to do that? Let's learn that. And that progression kind of took me about as far as personal protection outside the home kind of classes. And then after that, I got really, really fortunate. My training counselor for personal protection inside and outside the home was a pretty switched on guy and led me to a local instructor who kind of comes out of like the Dave Spalding group of folks. And I took some classes with him because, hey, let's learn some more. Around that same time, I discovered some local matches because, as with most public ranges, we can't draw out of a holster. So we're like, oh, we have discovered this thing called competitive shooting where they allow you to draw out of a holster and shoot on the move and use cover and all this other stuff. And so we'd start hitting, the occasional match or two because that's where you can kind of do these things. And that's where I kind of discovered, A, that I really, really sucked, and B, I really, really liked competing.
So there's a couple things there. I know for me, over the years, one of the ways that that's helped me learn something really, really well is to force myself to teach it. That kind of seems consistent with at least some of that instructor insight that you have. But I want to go into this idea that, you're learning how to learn a skill, you realizing that you're not doing well, or at least you're perceiving yourself not to do well. I think for anyone that's not familiar with the competitive shooting sports, you have to know that competitive shooters are a whole other world of skill that I think people don't realize. Like, I remember before I was a police officer, I would go out to the desert with some friends and I'd plink at cans, or, people would dump TVs out in the desert and stupid stuff that, I didn't know what I was doing. I was like 19 or something, and it levels the playing field out a little bit. And it's a whole other world of what good looks like, I think.
Being steeped in the competition world is a really good way to keep yourself humble, I think, especially if you broaden your horizons and shoot with really good competitors, like not necessarily just the dudes at the local club who kind of put things together, and you might end up being a big fish in a small pond, but like show up at nationals one year, for instance. That's a great way to feel terrible about yourself. In my area, we're very fortunate to have some really, really strong competitors, guys who place in, we've got a couple of national champions. We have revolver national champions around here. We have we have a ladies open national champion here. We have guys who routinely place in, the top 20, 25 at nationals when they show up, kind of thing. So shoot with people like that, and you're going to have a pretty good sense of what good looks like and what you look like next to good. That's why I'm always like, yeah, I'm a terrible shooter. Like, yeah, on the other hand, I realize that I'm a terrible shooter compared to the people I spend a lot of time around.
Right. And yeah, I can see what you mean. The company that you keep definitely shapes your idea of that in terms of being humble. So there's a couple of, in terms of building a new skill or a talent or learning a new thing, there's a couple of theories in psychology about where someone falls on a spectrum of how they think they become good at something. Some people think that they are just naturally talented or gifted at something, And some people think that it's a product of effort applied and they just kind of get incrementally better at things. And usually people tend to fall on one or two, how do I word this? People fall somewhere in between those two areas on a spectrum. Where do you assess your natural ability or talent to be on that spectrum?
As a shooter, every bit of improvement I have has been fought for. You have to understand, the first time I shot the IDPA classifier, this is the old classifier, which has 20-yard targets. I was shooting the dirt in front of the targets. Like, I literally could not get on paper, and I couldn't get on paper like because the target was too small at 20 yards. Like, I couldn't get the bullet all the way out to 20 yards because I was that bad of a shooter. You're laughing, but it's true. I was really pretty terrible. I was safe. I mean, besides the whole bullet didn't make it to the berm issue, but it went downrange, right?
Better than over the berm.
Right. We knew where the bullet went. It just wasn't, yeah. So I was a safe shooter and I knew how to handle a gun, but I was really, really bad. These days, my idea of like a fun, relaxing range session when I'm not like working on something in particular and I just want to go and do something enjoyable, I shoot 25-yard groups. I've been known to go out and shoot 50-yard groups for fun and relaxation. My 50-yard group is somewhere around 8 to 10 inches freestyle right now. So, it's another one of those. I feel terrible because I know people who can shoot 4-inch groups at 50 yards. But on the other hand,
you know plenty of people that can't hit anything at 50 yards.
Right. With a pistol with iron sights.
Right. So what are, you say that you fought for all of that skill. What were the critical components of fighting for that skill? Was it, and I guess what I'm looking for is between a little bit of being self-taught and working on little things and coaching. What were the components? Was it all repetition? Was it getting the right kind of feedback? How did you piece that together?
I've been fortunate to have some really, really good instructors, and that helped. So my first non-NRA instructor teaching me concealed carry skills, tactical skills, believed in shot timers in like 2008. So, he wasn't big on competition. He thought we could teach a lot of bad habits, but at the same time, he was totally cool with having a shot timer around and having a little friendly head-to-head competition in a class, that sort of thing. So I had really good grounding that way. I've been fortunate, especially the last, I want to say 3 years or so, I've had access to training from the likes of Bruce Gray, who I have been known to just call him on the way home from the range and be like, hey, I was working on this, and can you help? Or call him on the way home from a match and be like, hey, this went really well. Do you want to hear about it? And being able to have that kind of instant feedback on my performance has really helped. People like Yong Lee have been the same way for me, Tim Heron, Harold Hawkins. So I've just had a lot of really great resources from the coaching perspective. And then I have put in uncountable hours in dry fire.
So there's have you ever heard of the concept of deliberate practice?
Yes. This is talked about in my book.
Well,
block practice versus, when we talk about block practice versus random practice and the concept of mindful practice, which is very much basically deliberate practice, right? It's not necessarily whether you're doing it right or wrong in practice. It's knowing if you are doing it right or wrong and why are you doing it right or wrong.
That makes sense. So yeah, it's being able to call the shot, basically.
Yes.
So there's a little bit of self-awareness that comes with that went well, that didn't go well, before you even see the target. And I know in shooting especially, but the overarching theme is, you want it to be mentally engaging, and that's kind of what you're getting at, right? Being able to apply your thought to your outcome.
Right. Practice isn't just going through the motions and doing a lot of reps. And I think a lot of people do that. Is like, okay, I'm gonna do 10 dry fire draws tonight. And they do the 10 dry fire draws, so they can't tell you anything about what they're doing with those draws. They weren't thinking about it. So when I think about deliberate practice or mindful practice, things like that, that's well, what did you do? What went well? What didn't go well? What were you having trouble with tonight? Like, did you just jank your grip on every single draw? Because it's not really helpful to a good final product, right?
Right.
Or if maybe it is, if you know why you janked your grip on every draw and you have a good thought process on fixing it and you've started down the road of fixing it.
If anyone that's listening wants to hear about, or I guess read more about, and we're going to talk about Annette's book in a minute, but the idea of deliberate practice, there's a book called Talent is Overrated. And it basically what it boils down to is that talent is not a product of some innate gift. It comes through hard work, and there's a balance of quality and quantity. And kind of what it sounds like you're talking about, Annette, is the quality aspect of it, right? And so deliberate practice has usually 4 components. There's obviously a lot of repetition, but then there's a feedback element, and a lot of that comes from coaching. I think that's one of the errors that a lot of new shooters make, is that if they're not getting coaching or good coaching, they're not really getting the feedback on what inputs to make, to affect the outcome.
I think that some of it can be self-discoverable, but you have to be even more self-aware of what you're doing in order to do that.
Yeah.
Very, very honest with yourself. Coaching does not allow you to lie to yourself.
Right. And so yeah, you've got to have that feedback. It's huge. And then you already mentioned it's not just mindless repetition. It's got to be mentally engaging. And then finally, you've got to push yourself, and you've got to expand your comfort zones. And that means, once you put, as soon as you put, you go to the range and you start putting holes in paper, you start adding a little bit of time pressure. Suddenly that starts to throw a wrench in the mix, right? So
if you're practicing and every repetition is perfect, you're not really learning anything, right?
Yeah. Yep.
You've learned how to make it perfect at that speed. So like here's an example from a completely different world. I ski, or at least I used to ski downhill, snow skiing, right? And I used to ski with my in-laws, and it was a nice family vacation kind of thing. And my mother-in-law has the most beautiful technique on the snow. Just like their skis are perfectly parallel, there's this rhythm and there's this flow, and she skis at the exact same speed everywhere she goes on pretty much everything, and she kind of has her comfort zone on the kind of trails that she likes to ski, which is fine. She's a very competent technical skier. She can make it down pretty much anything on the mountain that you put her on. But if you take somebody who says, hey, let me try something that looks really, really hard, and maybe I'm going to fall a couple of times, and maybe I'm going to get over my skis too much and control, aren't they going to perhaps find a little bit more inside themselves and find the courage to do more, to do faster?
Yep. And I think that's huge, is you've got to find where those limits are. I know in SWAT, when we do, and this applies to shooting, but also some of the more, any of the tactical stuff, any of those skills, is every once in a while, you got to put it in the wall to know where that threshold is, to know what your boundaries and limitations are. 'Cause like you said, you're never going to expand on those until you figure out where it's at. Did you ever get any bad coaching? And we don't have to dime anyone out here.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you want to dime them out, by all means, go crazy. But we're not trying to badmouth anybody so much as focus on the ideas of bad coaching. Did you ever get any of that?
So here's the thing about bad coaching. It's not that bad coaching happens because somebody's trying to be bad to you, right? That they're trying to like hold you back or something. They're doing the best that they know for you. Yeah. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. That's something I think about quite a bit, because the first time I took practical fundamentals from OpSpec training, Bruce Gray, I learned something completely different about how to run my trigger. I learned how to prep my trigger and go reset during recoil and all this other stuff, instead of pinning the trigger, waiting for my gun to settle back down, letting my trigger out to the reset and coming back in. Completely different style. This is really kind of esoteric. It changed the way I shot quite a bit. It changed the way I thought about how to run the trigger. And it made me a little upset because I had been taught earlier, pin the trigger. pin the trigger. That's how you're going to have good trigger control. That's how you're going to know, you have to know where your reset is and all this other stuff. And I've been a very, very good student, and I had done exactly as I was taught.
I was taught the same way. And actually, it wasn't until I started talking more with you and read through your book and started to really start, in our circle, they've, at the instructor level, they've talked more about finding where that reset is and resetting during the recoil. But when you're trying, and I've incorporated that where I can, but when you're trying to relearn that habit, again, it goes back to that deliberate practice. It takes a lot of mindful engagement to correct that.
I'm still working on being 100% about it. And, I've had further thoughts about when things like that make sense and don't make sense and everything else. But be that as it may, I was taught one thing and was taught something 180 degrees the opposite that really ended up being a better way of thinking about it. I like to say universally, but certainly for me, right? Like it got me over quite a hump. It's hard. It's really hard. It feels kind of like a betrayal. But at the end of the day, the people who taught me that, they weren't trying to hold me back. They weren't, like, ha ha ha, we have this new girl shooter. We're going to make sure she never gets really, really good.
Right.
That wasn't it. This is a technique that they knew. This was a technique that they taught to the best of their ability, that they genuinely thought was a good technique. Maybe was there something lost in the translation of it? I've heard from a lot of people that, we teach pinning, but it's supposed to be sort of like an intermediate step just to teach you certain things about follow through and things like that. And then we move you on. Like, did I miss that lesson, or was it not taught? Maybe it was just something that happened later in time, as pedagogy changes and best practices change in the way that we instruct. But it's not that I didn't learn something good from them. I did learn something good from them. And that's not the only thing I learned, right? Like, I didn't go to a class where, if you go to practical fundamentals, all they'll teach you to do is how to run a trigger. But most classes aren't just how to run a trigger. There's all sorts of other skills that I learned from these instructors that are still good. So.
Yeah, I think that's important to keep in mind, because there is, you go on Facebook or really anywhere on the internet and the gloves come off, and people are real quick to flame each other. But for the most part, like you said, most instructors, I think, are benevolent. Their heart's in the right place. They're trying to help. That being said, if you are the new shooter, and especially if this isn't just a hobby, you're thinking about protection, self-defense, those sorts of things, then the question becomes, how do you sort through some of that? So let's assume that we have a brand new shooter who doesn't know what they're doing. They don't even own a gun yet. They're going to go buy a gun. What would your advice be in terms of going out and looking for professional training? Is there any specific questions they should ask? Are there certain credentials or styles they should be looking for? Or, my background comes from law enforcement, where I get force-fed whatever they give me. But for the new shooter that's just doing this for protection and self-defense, they might be going into this with, their own money and their own time. So how should they filter through kind of the good and the bad?
So I have an answer here that I think that especially new instructors should also pay attention to, because I think they'll learn a lot here about how to make themselves better instructors. And I think that one of the first things that you as a student need to look for in who you're going to trust really quite literally with your life is they have to be somebody who is taking seriously their role as an instructor, which means they're taking seriously their role as a student.
Yes.
They've got to have a broad training resume. They have to have a deep training resume. And I'm not saying, if they don't have 1,000 hours of training, they're not good enough to be your instructor. Scale this to the level of learning that you need, right? If you just need to learn how to shoot a gun, they probably don't need 500 hours of training or 1,000 hours of training to have that depth and breadth that's going to be helpful to you. As you move further on in your training, you're going to want to start seeing more of that, because it's important that your instructor knows not just the thing they're going to teach you. They have to know how that fits into context and why what they're teaching you is better or worse than other things that might be taught in the same realm, right?
That's huge. I like it.
You have to be able to, as an instructor, place your work in context, and you have to be able to really critically analyze what you're doing and why you're doing it. Now, all this might not directly translate to what you say in front of the classroom, but you should know it.
Yep.
And as a student choosing an instructor, one of the ways that you can kind of do that analysis is go, hey, what's your training resume? What's your training lineage? Who do you train with now? And, to some extent, that's going to be literally which classes have they gone to?
Or which ones do they want to take next?
Yes, what do they want to take next? Are they continuing to take classes on a regular basis? Tom Gibbons, who is probably, a hugely influential, long-term, been around forever instructor, still takes classes. He just was at a Gabe White class a couple of weeks ago, had wonderful things to say about it, and had stuff to say about like what he learned as a shooter and what he learned as an instructor and blah, blah, blah. He was really excited about it. And that to me is a sign of a really good instructor, because he's still learning new things. He's still staying up to date on what's out there. And he's still, going home and taking what he learned from that class as a student, learning the subject matter of the class, and as an instructor, looking at another instructor and incorporating that into his own work. So if you find out, who have they trained with? What are they going to do there? It's hard sometimes because you don't know as a student necessarily, where the bullshit is, right? Like you don't know that, okay, maybe they trained with a whole bunch of people, but they're all buddies with each other and they're all kind of feed each other the same crap.
Yeah.
I think as a student, the best way you can combat that is to don't limit your own training. We're all going to make a misstep, right? We're all going to end up in a class where, maybe that wasn't the best class we could have taken for all sorts of reasons. Phil Wong, right?
Yep.
And he's always happy to show us certificates from classes where we're like, really, Phil? You went with who? And I'm not going to dime people out, but he's right, though, in that, everybody kind of makes their mistakes on who they train with. What's really important about him is he's trained with other people since then. And he can speak now to exactly what he learned in those classes that were problematic and why they were problematic and how they fit into what he's doing now and how they fit into what he's learned in the future.
Yeah, I think the breadth and depth thing is really the part of this. And like you said, in terms of frames of reference, having something to compare it to, taking more classes and then having stuff to compare it to is a big deal. There's a guy that we talk a lot about on this podcast. I've been kind of a student of his philosophies, John Boyd. He was an Air Force guy. He wrote the OODA Loop. And one of the things that he used to tell kind of the people that he mentored and he led throughout his career was, you got to challenge all assumptions, because if you don't, what is doctrine on day one becomes dogma forever after. And I think that's a big deal, challenging those assumptions. I remember, when I went through the police academy, we were taught to, take your an overhand grip over the slide and rack it during your reloads. And then I started watching competitive shooters who were using the slide release. And then I started talking to high-end, guys that were in the high-end tactical, upper tier realms, and they use the same methods that the competitive shooters use. And so there was this dialogue in my head of, how did we come up with this? I mean, what's that?
We call that a clue in police work.
Right. Yeah. I'm not a detective or anything, but there's some gum on my shoe. But I'm, somewhere in there, a couple years in, I had this kind of dialogue with myself, like, if these guys do it this way and these guys do it that way, why? Which option you think is the right one and which one you employ is not as important as the conversation about why. And I think that's a really big deal. And there's a couple things that were kind of pointed out to me, and I understand that, like, from the police academy standpoint, you're saying, okay, we have a very limited number of hours to get someone to this level of proficiency, and we can't really, we're not training them to be super echo Navy SEAL, whatevers. We're training them to be baseline proficient. And so there's some trade-offs that come with that. But yeah, I think that dialogue is a big deal.
So I'm sympathetic to the fact that not everybody wants to, as Tamara Keel says, make this a hobby. where they're going to training classes every week or every month, or, they're traveling out of town for trainers or whatever else. But I think that you can still get a similar analysis of who's available to you by, going out there and talking to not just like the guys on your local Facebook group or, the guys at your local gun store, but reach out to and pay attention to trainers on the national level, trainers in other regions. And if you find one that you think is pretty on the ball, or you just want to talk to a whole bunch of them, we're all certainly willing to, go, hey, maybe you didn't know, but I travel and I'm going to be in your area, in your neck of the woods in 3 months. Or they'll go, hey, I don't do anything in your area, but I have this really good buddy that nobody's ever heard of who would be a great trainer for you. And he's got that depth and breadth and background and everything else. Use the fact that there are people out there who are doing that work vetting instructors and use that as a hint. We've talked about ballistic radio before, and you look at the trainers on there. That's probably a pretty good clue that they're decent. Or you look at some of the other trainers. Yes, some people are just marketing geniuses and they get themselves on everywhere, and they're on every show and all that. And maybe they are, maybe they aren't great instructors, but it's a clue, right? They're out there, they're doing something, they're learning, and then you can take a look at those names and go, hey, do they fit all of my other criteria?
Yeah, and I think that vetting process is going to answer a lot of your questions, and to some degree, and like we were saying earlier, you've just got to take more classes and have something to compare it to, and then you'll start just applying a little bit of critical thinking to it. Is going to go a long way.
I know it's a big ask, but you just got to kind of think what you're doing. Earlier on, I mentioned that this is an important decision because you're literally putting your life in their hands. And I'm really not being over dramatic about that. Shooting guns is like kind of a dangerous activity.
Turns out.
At the end of the day, like if you have a class that's not run safely, somebody can get seriously injured. Somebody can die. Even if a class is run safely, sometimes things go wrong. And it's not necessarily anybody's fault. But you better be in a class where that's going to be handled well. Because things go wrong around guns in class, it can be deadly. Things go wrong around guns out of class, that can be deadly. You need to be prepared for that, which means you need to be learning the right things in class.
Yeah, that's serious stuff. So if I did my numbers right here, it looks like you started competing somewhere in the like 2010, 2011 range. Is that ish?
That's about right. Yeah.
And this is just an assumption, so correct me if I'm wrong, but my guess, if I just had to make an assumption here, would be that you wanted to give it a shot. You did a match. It was kind of just for fun and just see what happens. And then you kind of got into it. And somewhere along the road, things started getting pretty serious. You're like, I guess you could say I'm kind of a big deal. And you start, you either start ranking or you get a sponsorship. Can you tell me about kind of that journey and what really, I guess what I'm getting at is what was it that ignited that passion that really took you down? Because now you're essentially doing this. I mean, you do this for work, right? Maybe not a standalone career, but you're doing it for work, right?
Yeah. I occasionally get paid cash money to do these sorts of things. When I say I was a bad shooter when I started, I'm really not kidding. I came in last place in something like every match I shot for about a year. And when we say last place, it wasn't by a little, it was by a lot. So not coming in last regularly actually was kind of a big deal and made me think, hey, there's room for, I'm not doomed to be this terrible person who just shows up and everybody, kind of pats her on the head because she's safe, but she can't shoot worth a damn. And kind of getting past that hump, as long as it took, made a big difference. And then it started being, hey, I can, kind of make it. I want to be a middle of the pack shooter. That was kind of my original goals. Like, I just want to be a good middle of the pack, middle third kind of shooter. The work that it took me to get there, I think, kind of created a beast that fed itself. Because I was like, well, if I just do a little bit more work, I could be this much more better. And at a certain point, I stopped chasing a specific goal and just started chasing getting better. You mentioned sponsorships and stuff like that. And I think a lot of people have this misconception that sponsorship is all about being a great shooter. There's a piece, but sponsorship is also, and it's a marketing tool at heart. So it's also about people who are good representatives of the company for a variety of reasons, who are good ambassadors for the company, who are good ambassadors for the shooting sports. And I've been very lucky. I've been supported by some fantastic companies. My very first sponsor was Filster, John Hontman there, who makes great holsters. And everybody's like, how do you sponsor a competitive shooter? It's a long story. And I do actually carry his gear. So, getting that was nice. It kind of, I always tell John, he's the first person who had faith in me that I could be something more than I was as a shooter. Because he was the first person to say, hey, wear my logo, use my gear. As I've gotten, on the national stage, I did shoot for SIG for a couple of years. I shot for Lucas Oil for a couple of years. I've actually scaled back in the last year or two. After SIG dropped its team, I had this thought that I really wanted to focus on my work and my shooting, and hung on to, some really close, I would call them family sponsors in how close I feel to them. So my local gun shop, King Shooter Supply, I proudly shoot for their team. They're my title sponsor. Gray Guns. Bruce is my gunsmith, my mentor, everything else you can imagine. Filster, a whole bunch of other folks that I've been really fortunate to work with. In terms of, do they drive my shooting ability? I think they enable me to do some things I couldn't otherwise. Shooting is expensive. Competitive shooting is an expensive thing to do. So, being able to have some gear, some ammo, some gunsmithing, things like that makes a difference. But I think the relationship between like good shooter and sponsorship isn't as direct as most people like to think it is.
There's an overarching theme in there and it's interesting that it's a two-way street, like you said. It's not just it wasn't just about the brands or the sponsors having that faith and investing in you as a good ambassador and all that, but also that your values kind of drive who you want to represent. It's another Boydism that we're big on, and that is that your formula for effectiveness is people, ideas, hardware, in that order, and investing in people is a big deal.
And I do want to be a good shooter to, help them look good.
Of course,
right?
Of course.
But it's not
the key there
it's not
is
the driving factor.
Yeah, and the key is how do you get there, and and that's the fundamental that you have to start with, right? So, and to back up for a second about Filster, and I'm not, I'm not getting paid to tell you this. I carry one of their holsters also, and it's awesome. I was all day today. I was downtown, and that's what I was wearing. So check them out. And you have a
I've got a discount code.
Yeah. What is that?
I've got a discount code. If you go to filsterholsters.com and order, and you use code BlastingBeauty10, so I'm known as the beauty behind the blast, right? So it's BlastingBeauty10, and you'll get I think it's 10%, and then for most people that ends up covering their shipping.
Cool.
Which is a pretty good deal to me.
Yeah, we'll make sure that in the show notes we include that so you guys can go use that. Okay, so competing, practice, that kind of stuff. Do you ever use tools like, going back to this investing in people and then ideas before you actually get into the guns and stuff, do you ever use stuff like self-talk, imagery, rehearsals, any of that warm and fuzzy stuff? Is that something you believe in and you use?
I talk to myself all the time. It is great because as a competitive shooter, as somebody who does all this stuff all day long, people don't think I'm crazy. More crazy. I think it really does make a difference. I'm not necessarily the best in the world at it, but I have noticed things like, if you tell yourself something, it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if you tell yourself, well, I am terrible on the first stage of every match, you will, in fact, be terrible in the first stage of every match. And you need to tell yourself that, hey, the first stage is great. I'm going to have a fresh start. It's going to be wonderful. And it's going to feel really fake. But it works. So you have to trick yourself into believing some of that. And you have to, you hear me say all the time, and I've said it in the show, like, oh, I'm a terrible shooter. Like, that's really not productive.
It's kind of, and it's kind of a motivation tool, probably. I think.
Yeah.
I think the self-talk thing goes a long way, especially in terms of like realizing your ability to improve. And a little while back, we talked about that incremental versus entity-based theory of learning, where do you think you're just naturally good at certain things, or do you think that with effort you can get there? And it kind of starts with what you said a little bit ago about, hey, I'm not aiming for the top shooter spot right this second so much as constantly pushing myself to get incrementally along that path.
Right.
And
A lot of people in the shooting sports love Lanny Basum's With Winning in Mind.
yeah,
And
I've
one of
read
the
that.
things he likes to talk about is, if you set a weight loss goal that says, I'm going to lose 5 pounds, and you lose 5 pounds, what happens when you get there? You tend to gain it back because you've accomplished your goal. So it's a little bit more productive to be like, instead of saying, I want to lose 5 pounds, you say, I want to weigh blah. My goal is to weigh blah.
Right.
So it kind of helps you that. Or my goal is to lose weight. Instead of saying, the way in which you phrase your self-talk makes a big difference. The way in which you think of yourself. And even if you want to give yourself sort of a motivational kick in the butt of, I'm terrible, I need to be better, then we still need to be careful about how we do that so that we don't get stuck in a rut of not being very good. Not to mention, Gabby Franco will come and yell at you if you do that. I'm just saying.
Yeah, that's it's a good point. Goal setting is all about setting the right goals and framing them the right way for success, and that's an excellent point. So, I want to talk about applying competition to self-defense. We used a little bit of an example a little while ago, and there's obviously a dichotomy in this in terms of you have to balance, racing and practical application stuff a little bit. But can you tell me about that balance in terms of balancing competitive stuff with self-defense stuff, and what are the gotchas and what are the things that apply really well? How do you kind of balance that?
So as a competitor, especially in USPSA, I often call USP sort of one of the purest expressions of practical shooting. Right? It is all about technique. It's about the shooting, it's about the movement, but it's very it's almost academic, right? And it's all, at the end of the day, it is about your shooting ability. In self-defense, your shooting ability is about this much. And I'm holding my fingers like anybody listening to audio is going to see this. But it's a tiny, tiny piece of the puzzle of what you need to know for self-defense, right? It only gets to the shooting part of the problem, which is something that hopefully comes after the mindset part of the problem, the less lethal part of the problem, the conflict resolution and the de-escalation part of the problem. And it's something that comes before the post-incident part of the problem. It's a small piece. In fact, it's almost an optional piece for a lot of people. I can put somebody through an entire self-defense curriculum, skip the gun part, and they'll still be really, really well prepared for self-defense.
Yeah.
In fact, every time I go to Jersey, that's what I have to do. I can't carry a gun in New Jersey. I don't have LEOSA.
Yeah, I totally agree. The judgment, the mindset, the situational awareness, all those things go far more than whether or not you can put holes in a guy at the distances that you're likely to be at.
The problem is that when you need to put holes in a guy, you got to do it really well.
Yes,
right?
True.
It's a very, very high impact skill. It's just a very small slice. So I think one of the problems that, like, when you come out of the competition world, everybody kind of thinks, well, I'm a good shooter. I can solve the problem with the gun. And to some extent, that's true. Like, am I comfortable taking eye box shots to a certain distance under a lot of pressure? Yeah, because I do it in a match and it's not the same pressure, but I know I can, right? Do I know I can get hits on target at whatever distance? Yeah, because I go out to the range on a fairly regular basis. I shoot matches and I know what I can and can't do. But that doesn't solve all the problems. At the same time, I think that when you come from the self-defense world, you get really caught up in the, wow, this tactic is going to get me killed in the streets because I am standing in the middle of a doorway or a window. I'm like, well, yeah, but you're learning how to shoot really, really well. And at some point, I would hope that you can thoughtfully consider that if somebody's shooting back at you, you will probably want to hide behind the door instead of standing in the doorway. Like, this is not rocket science. In some ways, it's just like a different stage plan. You just put the fault line somewhere else. You can't stand in the middle of the doorway this time. You have to stand at the edge of the doorway. it's not that hard. There's some advantage, I think, for some folks that, don't shoot competitively a lot, for instance, to say, well, I'm going to shoot this match the way, with my real carry gear, with real tactics, blah, 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 and I'm just going to take the hit on my scores. Ego-wise, most people aren't very comfortable with that, because then they're going to use that as an excuse for why they did badly in the match. I think that, if you're going to game, just realize that you're gaming a different game. That's all. I don't think that there's a necessity that you're going to get killed in the streets. I want to, one thing that I think is really interesting. So I started in the self-defense world, went to the competition world, didn't do anything self-defense related for years, and kind of like jumped both feet back into the defensive world in the last year or so. So I show up at actually John and Melody's class last spring with my carry gear, which I don't really shoot a whole lot, and shot the class and did fairly well from a shooting perspective because I knew how to shoot. And at a certain point in your development as a shooter, sights are sights and triggers are triggers. And it's not really necessarily going to make a huge difference. And even the fact that my draw is completely different. I carry AIWP and I compete with a drop and offset holster at 3 o'clock. I don't forget where my gun is. I don't have, my clearing my cover garment. It's kind of a, hot mess. But once my hand's on the gun, it's not really that different. Shooting is shooting.
Right. And you can be good at more than one thing. It goes a long way. I have a story about thinking you can solve all the problems with the gun. And it's a problem-solving equation, and it basically it sums up the self-defense issue, and you can be a good shooter but not be prepared to solve your problem. We did a scenario where for some people in our agency where they were going to be responding to a guy with a gun call, and it was a team of 4 of them, and several people have gone into that scenario, and we made a bunch of stuff available to them, less lethal and otherwise. And for clarity's sake, every officer's got a bunch of less lethal on his or her belt. And then we've also got stuff that's probably going to be in the trunk, like the beanbag shotguns, a pepper ball gun, stuff like that. And we made stuff available to them, and they opted not to take all of that. One group in particular opted not to take any of it. And they said, no, if I'm going to a gun call, I'm taking guns to a gunfight. And obviously that was not the right decision. What's that?
It might not actually be a gunfight.
Yeah, obviously that was not the right solution, as they learned. Lack of foresight. And so what they ended up having was a guy that was kind of moving around a car, and he was kind of reaching in the car, coming out of the car, never displays a gun. And so you would have had options to potentially deal with that, but you left them back in your car. So that's a huge part of it, is applying the right skills, and one of those skills is just being thoughtful in what could go wrong.
Well, there was a kid with a gun call at a school district in Texas in the last couple of days, and it turns out kid had a cafeteria chair.
That's basically the same thing.
and well, as the responding police officer, maybe you did not want to go to guns for that. Maybe you just wanted to show up and be like, hey, dude, what's that under your arm?
Gosh. Yeah. So what do you think are the biggest misconceptions to a novice shooter? Like, for example, one of the things that we've talked about, and that People Ideas hardware formula, is you see a lot of new shooters that they want to go get, these guns, and they want to put a fancy trigger on it, and they want a red dot, and they're going to put a light on it, and they're going to do all these cool things and trick out their guns, and they think that's going to solve all their problems. Well, I think we all agree, and this speaks to what you said earlier, sights are sights, triggers are triggers. It doesn't change that much. If you suck, you're still going to suck, right? Do you have any favorite misconceptions just in general?
So first of all, I want to talk about the idea that can you or can you not buy skill? I think what you can buy is forgiveness. Which is a little different.
Yeah,
so,
good way of looking at it.
If you can buy your way into equipment that will be more tolerant of bad technique and of mistakes, that may or may not be a good thing. There are certainly arguments for, well, if this isn't going to be a hobby for me, or if I don't need to learn a certain kind of gun or whatever else, and there's no other downsides to the gun that I'm using that has, made up for all of the potential flaws or issues in my technique, then what does it matter? Why don't I shoot a 2011 with an 11-ounce trigger and a red dot and everything else? Like, well, you might not be able to carry it.
Or want
maybe
to.
that a trigger like that might not be the most defensible piece of equipment that you're going to bring into the courtroom if you have to get into a defensive shooting, for instance. So, yes, you can buy forgiveness. The question is it forgiveness that's worth buying?
I had a rule when I was getting better at shooting, again, as a police officer, and I was trying to improve. I had a rule that I wasn't going to add or change anything on my gun until I was shooting perfect scores on our regular qualification. Until I was acing that thing consistently, wasn't touching the gun. It wasn't until after that I said, okay, I can see the application to put a mag well on my gun, and I can see the application of switching from the sights that I had to Trijicon HDs, things like that. But yeah, I agree.
Hand, do we want to torture somebody, right? Like, it's already hard enough to learn how to shoot, especially pistol.
True.
Do we need to make it harder than it has to be? I mean, my first full-size pistol, centerfire pistol, was a TT6 DAC, double action Kellerman. It was like 8 and 10 pounds. Was that, did I give myself too much of a hurdle in shooting a very difficult gun? Where I could have, my improvement went up. The rate of my improvement went up vastly when I went to an M&P with, a 6-pound striker fire trigger. Because I didn't have to spend all of my time and all of my energy fighting this ridiculous double action trigger. And instead I could, learn how to shoot.
Yeah, that's fair. Good point. So misconceptions. Any others? Any other favorite ones? That was kind of my example that I used. I don't know if we got yours.
That's actually one of my favorite ones. Is like, can we or can we not buy skill, and when it doesn't it matter? I think another one is this idea that either you're good at shooting or you're not good at shooting. There's a lot of people who kind of think that it's one or the other, and we've already talked about how you could probably work your way into being good. Another one that I've gotten, this one drives me absolutely batshit crazy. Women are better students and better shooters. I am sorry. Women are a very large and diverse group of individuals. And even if we try to generalize something like that, there are two problems with it. One is it's not necessarily true, which can set you up for some really interesting failures as an instructor when you make those assumptions and you run into a student who has a chip on her shoulder, who has decided she's learned everything she needs to know, who's decided that her brother, uncle, father, grandfather, boyfriend is a cop, and therefore everything that she needs, everything that you are trying to teach her is put up against what they have taught her. They're not necessarily going to be better students, and that can be a challenge as an instructor. But from a student perspective, what if your female student, who you have been busy telling that women are naturally better shooters and naturally better students and everything else, isn't? What have you done to her psyche?
Yeah.
Right? I'm supposed to be naturally good at this, and I can't even hit the fucking target. You have just set her up for failure because you've set this expectation that she's going to be this great shooter because women are naturally great shooters.
Yeah.
And she's not. And then she's going to be disappointed, and she's going to be probably really frustrated with it. And what are you going to have to help her with? The platitude that women are better students and they're better shooters. Well, okay, she's going to sit here and go, clearly I am not. Now what? Yeah.
And that's an instructor, something like you said, having careful, I don't know if careful is the right word, but instructors who are thoughtful enough to think about that thing. I've heard you love the expression slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
Oh, yeah, that's another one. Slow is slow, smooth is smooth, fast is fast.
Yes. So, real quick, I got to tell you, we actually did an entire episode on that expression. And
I will need to drink heavily before I listen to it.
no, well, this is what's funny is I don't think. Okay, so in basically the premise of that discussion was there are a lot of ideas, you know, in any domain or any realm, but you know, the tactical community being one of them, and obviously a segment of that being the shooting world. A lot of ideas come from those communities or those realms, and then they play the telephone game and they kind of morph and they evolve and they get incorrectly applied, and it's a disaster. And so in shooting in particular, it you know, it's a perfect misapplication. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Nope. You could be slow, smooth, and not fast.
Yes.
Where it made sense to me, and I always looked at slow is smooth, smooth is fast in a cognitive sense. Under stress, we tend to have time distortions. And so when I was an EMT and I worked on an ambulance and I would go into a chaotic situation, you start scrambling because you have that rushed feeling of I've got to do something really, really quick. Slowing yourself down in your thoughts made the whole thing go smoother and then therefore quicker, right? And that was kind of the lesson that I took from that. And I don't know where that turned into like proficiency skills. It came, to me, it's more efficient in a stress management sense, or at the very least in a learning new things kind of sense, Yeah.
I think it's a really attractive idea to say slow, smooth, smooth is fast, because that's a progression that seems to make intuitive sense in terms of I can figure out how to do that. Like I can figure out how to slow it down. I can figure out how to make it really, really flowy, and then I can make that flow faster. It seems to make sense. I will say you can do very, very smoothly, very, very inefficient things. You just kind of make it part of your routine, and suddenly you're doing really stupid things, but they're really, really smooth. And you can even make those smooth, inefficient things fast. They're just never going to be objectively fast because they're ultimately inefficient. But the words, they're attractive.
Yeah. Well, we like summing things up in phrases and expressions and things like that. In law enforcement, we used to teach ask, tell, make. That was like your kind of your algorithm for arresting somebody, right? You're going to ask them, then you're going to tell them, and then you're going to force them. And the problem with that is that at its face, if you dumb that down too much, and we can go all day long on law enforcement examples, the 21-foot rule. The 21-foot rule was a principle that was supposed to teach you the difference of action versus reaction. It was never to say that at 19.5 feet you're safe, or you're in danger, and at 23.5 feet you're safe. But you see how that gets, the whole sheepdog thing. Sheepdogs is supposed to make me okay with the need to have to kill somebody. It's not a cartoon character, Like, these are all these things that started as little decent ideas that get bastardized into cartoon caricature proportions, right?
I think what I really hated about slow, smooth, smooth, and fast is it's not just a caricature, but it's something that it gets paired very much with speed comes naturally. Because the idea is if you slow it down and you're smooth, if you're smooth, you'll eventually be fast, and it'll just all kind of happen. Speed comes naturally. And it doesn't.
No.
It doesn't. If you want to be faster, you must go faster. Like, there's not some magic thing that happens one day and suddenly you're just doing it faster. Remember when we talked about my mother-in-law who skis at the same pace?
Right.
No matter what she's going down. She's very, very smooth. She's not fast.
Probably not winning races.
And she's never gonna be fast unless she wants to go fast. And for me, this was a huge problem as a shooter. I was not only was I a bad shooter, I was a bad slow shooter. It was, I'm told, kind of torturous to watch me shoot early matches. So I was slow and I was bad, but I was kind of smooth. And as I smoothed out and I just, I got smoother and smoother, I wasn't getting any faster until I specifically worked on getting faster.
Yep.
And, now I am, but it's not something that just happens. The only way to go fast is to go fast.
I agree. So what are your thoughts on concealed carry? Earlier you said that you carry appendix carry, and in case you're someone that doesn't know what that means, the expression that she used was AIWB, which is appendix carry, appendix inside the waistband. Your appendix is just right of your navel, more or less. And so appendix carry is usually just kind of the colloquial thing to mean the front of your waistband. Talk to me about how you came to that choice.
Side. I go to the most people carry the strong side. I actually carry just cross center line because I'm little, so it ends up being sort of a better concealment for me, and ends up being the same draw as everyone else.
And why did you choose the front of your waistband? I mean, can you talk me through your thought process on why you carry there?
There's a couple of reasons. One is I do shoot for Philster, so I'm kind of obligated to try his gear, right? But really, the real reason is that I was looking for a way to be able to carry more gun. I carried behind the hip, standard traditional IWB for a long time, and that worked fine. But I, for a variety of reasons, decided I needed to start carrying more gun than I was. And in order to do that, the only way I could conceal was to go to appendix. So there I was.
But Annette, why not carry in your purse? You've got
we have to do this?
You've got some videos on the topic.
There's like a hour-long video you can watch if you want to know how I feel about carrying in a purse.
And we're gonna link to it. But suffice to say that Annette, and maybe we could find one of the pictures. You've got some pictures online of you shooting. She's not exactly Shrek.
No, I'm 5'4". I am a pretty true size 4 in women's clothing. My newest nickname is Tiny Purple Demon. Granted, it was given by a very large man, but I am not a large woman. But I like to carry my normal carry gun is actually a Glock 19. And if I'm not carrying the 19, my preference is to carry a 320 subcompact, which is relatively small, but on me, not that small.
Right.
And I also have a little 80 because for me, that's actually a pretty good size gun.
I think, and that is really the takeaway here, is that if you can carry guns of those size, a Glock 19, I mean, you're talking about a 15-round 9mm handgun.
Yeah.
If you can carry that in your waistband, then really you don't got any excuses.
I mean, so I want to kind of get at that. What I learned carrying the 19 is it's both easier and harder than it looks, right? So it's a lot easier than it looks. I have no problem carrying that 19 almost anywhere. I don't carry it to the office most of the time because it is a lot of gun to deal with. But casual clothes pretty much all the time. Yes, I can sit down carrying appendix. Mm-hmm. I can do long car drives carrying appendix. I do property, like I paint. I've done drywall in appendix. I've done demolition in carrying appendix and all that. It's easier than it looks. It's also a little bit harder than it looks too to carry that much gun. I mean, there is some work involved in making that concealment work, especially in less permissive environments. So I get why somebody would not want to go through that hassle. But at the same time, I would encourage them to try it because they might find that it's not as much hassle as they think it would be.
And speaking specifically to appendix carry, what I figured out, partly from using one of Philster's holsters and using a Dark Star Gear holster, and again, no one's paying me to recommend their holsters. They're both awesome, but there's some hacks. And like Philster, for example, has kind of a mold built into the to the holster that sits up against your body that pushes it away a little bit. And they also use kind of a wing that uses your belt to turn it inwards. And so there's some hacks to it that you really have to give it an honest chance to try it out. You can't just go take whatever other holster, shove it down the front of your pants and think that it's going to be good to go, because it's probably not. There's some purpose-built features that make it work well, I think.
Yeah, and the choice of belt matters, and the choice of clothing matters. So, like the rise of your pants, how high your waistband is in comparison to your hips and to your navel will make a difference. One of the interesting things about women's clothing that I've noticed is that, so a lot of like dress pants and stuff like that are of a lighter weight fabric, and that can have some that can have some impact on your ability to carry larger and heavier guns, because then your belt becomes the only thing holding that gun up, not your belt and your pants, because your pants are structurally not really there,
right,
for purposes of carrying a gun. And this is all assuming that you're wearing pants that have belt loops. That's actually easier than most people think for women's pants, once you get outside of the whole I want to wear yoga pants all the time. There are yoga pants with belt loops, but in terms of like casual pants, I mean, jeans, obviously you can always find jeans with belt loops. Even dress pants, though, every suit that I own, and my day job is a lawyer, so I own a lot of suits, and every pair of dress slacks I own all have belt loops, so they can be found. New York & Company is great. Anne Klein used to always put belt loops on. You just got to do a little shopping around, or you can have them added.
Yep, that's good advice. And you've got a whole bunch of videos and resources and stuff. People can check that out, I think. So we talked about training, and kind of boils down to that breadth and depth thing. A new concealed carrier needs to go out and probably take a couple of classes, have something to compare it to, ask lots of questions. We talked about some of the gear stuff. And I want to get into practice a little bit, because you wrote a book. I have the book. It's awesome.
How'd you like?
And so let's talk about that and what your philosophy is on how you can practice and stay proficient at home.
So the book is called The Dry Fire Primer. It's available on Amazon. It's available directly from me at dryfireprimer.blastingbeauty.com. And I have a whole bunch of resellers so that you can pick up a copy when you're shopping with your favorite folks at Filster. Grey Guns is just about to pick it up. Big Tex Outdoors has it. Gun Goddess has it. ConcealedCarry.com has it. A whole bunch of places. I'm probably missing somebody, and I'm really sorry if I am. So the book is intended to take somebody who goes, hey, I know what dry fire is, but I don't know what to do with it. Or I've been doing some dry fire, but I don't feel like I'm getting everything I can out of it, and help them through those hurdles. It's not really intended to give you a whole bunch of specific drills to do. There are already books on the market that do that very, very well. And I'm not here to encroach on the likes of Ben Steger or Steve Anderson or Mike Seeklander. That's not what I'm trying to do or compete with. What I'm trying to do is to set you up for success with that. So people go, well, like, what? Dry fire. That's where I like take my gun and I unload it and I put a penny on the front sight and I point it at the wall and pull the trigger, right? Sort of. That's a piece. That's something we can do, but that's not everything that we can do, right? Dry fire is everything that you can do in live fire, but without the noise and recoil. That's something that Bruce Gray told me. And that once you figure that out, then you can go, well, yeah, I can practice pressing the trigger. I can also practice drawing my gun. I can practice shooting multiple targets. I can practice working around cover. I can practice moving with a gun. You see where this is going? Anything
a little bit
that
of creativity.
I can do with a gun.
Yep.
Everything I can do with a gun live fire, I can do in dry fire in the right environment. And so, that's kind of another area that the book gets into, is like, how do you set yourself up for it? Like, how do you set yourself up for success so you actually do this on a regular basis? How do you fit in your schedule? How much do you need to do? What's a safe environment for dry fire? Should I be pointing my gun at the TV to dry fire? I would suggest that's probably not the best idea that you have ever had in your life. And then, we talked about like purposeful practice and mindful practice and getting faster and all those other things. And that's kind of other things that I talk about in the book because, everything that we learn how to do behind a gun, the only things that we miss in dry fire are things that are relatively minor to the experience of shooting. So if you have good underlying training, if you have good coaching available to you, if you're really, really thoughtful about what you can do, and you do it in a safe environment, then you can do it without spending money and without spending time going to the range.
Yeah, and that's a huge one because one of the things that I think you've talked about, and I'm pretty sure it's in the book as well. I'm trying to decipher stuff that I read in the book and stuff that we've just talked about, but is the idea of recency, right?
Yes.
And you can constantly, even though you might only make it to the range so often, or you only have so much money to spend on ammo. What I have found is that just take a box or two of ammo and shoot every once in a while. That goes a lot farther than, hundreds of rounds at any given time. Just a little bit at a time will reinforce a lot of those fundamentals. And you can do a lot of that, like you're saying, with some creativity in dry fire, and you can break it down into all the little components. It's not just the trigger, it's a lot of things.
I think I made it to the range to practice less than 6 times in 2017. I certainly didn't make it to the range to practice more than twice to prepare for the Area 8 championships. A lot of dry fire, lots and lots of dry fire. I think I logged 150, 200 dry fire sessions in 2017. And I lost almost none of my edge.
Wow, that says a lot.
Because I dry fired a lot.
Well, we'll make sure that we put links, obviously, to the book and obviously to your Facebook page, your website, all the other things that you want whoever's listening to check out. Do you have any last-minute advice for anyone that's just kind of getting into this based on your experience and kind of like I said, law enforcement, you kind of get force-fed whatever they put in the box for you. But if you're someone that's starting out on your own, what would you tell a newcomer kind of getting into this?
I think if I had to pick one theme, what I'd really say is to stretch out of your comfort zone. Get out of your comfort zone. Go take a class. Go take a class with somebody new. Go try a competition, a match. Go learn how to go faster or try to shoot a tighter group. But whatever you're comfortable with, try doing something else.
That is great advice. And I think that coupled with all of the other advice that you gave to everyone in our episode will go a long way for them. Well, they'll know where to find you. And if you guys definitely go check out, you're on Facebook. What is the correct address for Facebook? Because I've typed this in and I've gotten it wrong. It's Blasting Beauty or Beauty Behind the Blast?
It is facebook.com/blastingbeauty. But if you're on Facebook and you search for it and you search for Beauty Behind the Blast, you'll find me.
Okay, that's why I get it wrong. Because I could search for it one way and still find it either way. All right. Yes. Well, thanks, Annette. I appreciate it. And that's all I got. Do you have anything else?
That's all I have. Thank you very much for asking me on. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks. Good talk.